Ha ha ha! $50,000 says you can't say one word in Japanese. Not one word. Say it louder, so the whole room hears. Sir, forgive the 書類に気になる点がございます。今夜ご署名されるまめにご確認いただいたと存じます。You speak very well. Where did you learn?
Get out, now. The man at the head of the table did not even look up when he said it. He just lifted one hand and waved it toward the door the way you wave away smoke. I'm here to service the room, sir, the janitor said, where the machines rattled the floor at 4 o'clock. Then the supervisor scheduled it for 4 o'clock. And so are you. I'm closing a $128 million deal in this room, and you walked in pushing a mop bucket. Pick that up off the floor and get out before I have you fired by the end of the hour. The papers had slid off the edge of the table when he shoved his chair back. Maybe 40 pages fanned out across the carpet near the janitor's shoes. The janitor bent down. He did not rush, where the machines rattled the floor one at a time, and as he did, his eyes moved across them, line by line, the way a man reads something he understands. Nobody at that table noticed. They were all watching the developer's face turn red, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. There were 11 people in that conference suite on the 32nd floor of the Carrington Hotel. Before the night was over, every one of them would be on their feet, but not for the man with the $128 million deal, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. His name was Bryce Caldwell, net worth somewhere north of $400 million, depending on which quarter you asked. He had built half the glass towers along the Chicago River and put his name on most of them. Tonight he was hosting a delegation from the Hoshino Group out of Tokyo, 4 men in dark suits, trying to sell them the development rights to a stretch of lakefront called Lakeshore Commons. And right now, in front of machines rattled the floor to impress, he was losing a staring contest with a janitor who had not yet left the room. The man in the gray uniform was named Andre Coleman. He was 34 years old. Where the machines rattled the floor midnight. He had cleaned rooms at the Carrington for 7 years. And there was something true about him that not one person in that building knew, because in 7 years nobody had ever thought to ask. Andre straightened the stack of papers, set them gently on the corner of the table, and turned toward the door. He was 3 steps from leaving. He could have walked out, clocked out, gone home, and let the whole thing die in that room. Let Caldwell win. But the lead investor was talking, quietly, in Japanese, leaning toward the associate beside him, 2 short sentences, low enough that he assumed no one in the room could understand him. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. Andre had said, in Japanese, "This one talks about partnership, but he treats his own staff like furniture. I am beginning to wonder what he will treat us like once the ink is dry." Andre's hand was already on the door. His shoulders changed, just slightly. His chin lifted maybe half an inch. He stood there for 1 second, then 2, the kind of pause that happens when a man is deciding whether to spend something he has been saving his whole life. Then he turned around, not fast, not angry. He turned the way you turn when you have finally decided to stop being invisible. Caldwell saw him coming back and smirked. Oh, he wants to apologize. Good. Make it quick. Andre did not look at Caldwell. He looked at the lead investor, the older man with the silver at his temples, and he opened his mouth and he spoke in Japanese. Not tourist Japanese, not the kind you learn from an app on a bus. This was fluid, formal, layered with the right honorifics, the keigo that takes years to wear naturally, the speech you use with a man you respect and have just met. He said, "In Japanese, sir, please forgive the interruption, and please forgive my employer's words I would not normally speak." Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. But I noticed something in the documents that fell on the floor, and I think it would be before someone looks at it again. The room went silent, not restaurant silent. The specific kind of silent where you can hear the air conditioning and the ice settling in someone's glass. Bryce Caldwell's smirk slid off his face like water off glass. The lead investor set down his pen. He had been doodling on his notepad a moment ago. Half bored, a man who had already decided the meeting was a formality. Now he was leaning forward. He looked at Andre for a long moment. Then he answered in Japanese, "You speak very well. Where did you learn?" Andre did not hesitate. "Hartwell University," he said, still in Japanese. "I studied law there, international commercial law." I did not finish. The investor's eyebrows lifted a fraction of an inch. Caldwell finally found his voice, and it came out loud and brittle in English. "Okay, cute." He learned a few phrases off a language tape. He looked at his guests with a tight grin. They love it when you make an effort, right? Very charming. But this is a business meeting, and the help is leaving now. Andre turned to him then, calm, unbothered, like he had all night. Mr. Caldwell, he said in English, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. Would you like me to translate what your guests have said to each other for the last 10 minutes? Because they've raised 3 concerns about your proposal. And from the way you've been nodding, I don't think you understood a single one of them. Nobody at that table moved. The lead investor looked at Caldwell, then at Andre, then back at Caldwell. He did not say a word. He did not need to. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, and Bryce Caldwell, who had not lost an argument in public in 20 years, sat there with his mouth slightly open and nothing coming out of it. The 40 pages of the contract sat on the corner of the table where Andre had set them. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, nobody had picked them back up. Everyone was looking at the man in the gray uniform. Andre Coleman did not learn Japanese in a classroom. Not really. He learned it the way you learn anything you love when you are 19 and broke and hungry for a way out. He grew up on the south side of Chicago, in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, with a father who worked 2 jobs and a mother who died of a stroke when Andre was 11. His father, Clarence Coleman, was a steam fitter. 30 years on job sites, knees shot, hands like rope, a man who could not read a contract to save his life, and who told his son the same 4 words every single morning before school. Somebody they need. Andre was smart in the way that scares teachers. He read everything. He tested into a magnet high school across the city and rode 2 buses each way to get there. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. He fell in love with the law the year a landlord tried to evict the family on a technicality, and a free legal aid lawyer, a young woman who could not have been more than 26, walked into housing court and tore the eviction apart in 9 minutes flat. Andre sat in the back row and watched her do it, and he thought, I want to do that. Where the machine, the person who walks into the room and changes what is allowed to happen to people like us. Where the machine rattled the floor till midnight, on a scholarship. He took Japanese his first year almost by accident because the section fit his schedule, and then he stayed because he was good at it, and then he loved it because the professor, an old man named Dr. Okafor who had spent 20 years in Osaka, told him he had the best ear of any student he had taught in a decade. By his 3rd year of law school, Andre had decided to write his thesis on the differences between American and Japanese real estate law. He spent a summer in Kyoto on a grant, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. He read property contracts until the characters stopped looking like characters and started looking like meaning. Where the machines rattled the floor until the monsters of one semester degree when his father fell. It was a 30-foot fall on a job that had cut corners on the scaffolding, and the company that owned the site declared bankruptcy 4 days later, and the insurance evaporated like it had never existed. Clarence Coleman survived. Barely. 3 surgeries, a shattered pelvis, a year in a wheelchair, and a bill that by the time it stopped growing, where the machines rattled the floor $1,000. Andre did the math the way you do math when there is only one answer. He left school in the middle of his final semester. He took the first job that paid the first week because the rent and the medical bills did not care about his GPA. The Carrington was hiring overnight housekeeping. It paid. He took it. That was 7 years ago. He never went back. There was always one more bill, one more month, one more reason the timing wasn't right. His father got better, then worse, then better again. The debt shrank by inches, and somewhere in those 7 years, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, Andre stopped telling people who he used to be because the look on their faces when he told them was worse than the silence when he didn't. But he never stopped reading. Every night on his break in the staff room that smelled like burnt coffee, where the machines rattled the floor with a cracked screen, he read property law. He read the trade journals he could find for free. And every morning on the bus he put one earbud in, the one that still worked, and he listened to Japanese. News broadcasts, old lectures, because the law cost money to go back to, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. But a language was free to keep. That was the man Bryce Caldwell had just told to pick the papers up off the floor. Caldwell did not get to $400 million by backing down when he was embarrassed. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. He got there by doubling until the other person quit first, so that is exactly what he did. He reached across the table, picked up the 40-page contract, and slid it down the length of the table toward Andre. right through a ring of condensation from someone's water glass. Fine, he said. You read law. You speak Japanese. Let's see it. Read me Clause 9. Translate it. Right now, out loud, in front of everyone. He was betting on something specific, and he knew exactly what he was doing. Conversational Japanese and written legal Japanese are two completely different animals. A man could grow up speaking a language, and man could choke on a contract written in dense commercial terms. Caldwell had seen people fold under far less. He leaned back, certain. Unless that's a little above your pay grade, he added. Which, let's be honest, everything in this room is. By now the meeting had an audience. The associate near the door had stopped pretending to take notes. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. One of the younger, halfway out of his pocket. Frank Delaney, the hotel's general manager, had appeared in the doorway, summoned by someone who'd whispered that there was a situation on 32, and he stood there now, very still, watching. Andre picked up the contract. He didn't snatch it. He lifted it the way a surgeon lifts an instrument, with no wasted motion. His eyes went down the page, not frantically, not slowly, with the steady rhythm of a man reading something in a language that lives in his bones. Then he started to translate, in English clear as glass. Clause 9, he said. Transfer of development rights. He broke it down. What triggered the transfer? What the Hoshino Group was actually buying, and what they only thought they were buying. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. He flagged that the standard American phrasing would normally include the words hold harmless, which were missing from the English version Caldwell's lawyers had drafted. And then he got to Clause 14. He stopped. This zoning provision, he said, still looking at the page. The language here references the wrong section of the Illinois Land Use Code. It cites the section that governs commercial replatting. But Lakeshore Commons is mixed residential. The section you want is the 1-2 paragraphs down. As written, this clause is unenforceable. And if the city's planning department catches it during the permit review, and they will, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, the development rights you're selling these gentlemen for $128 million could be void within 18 months, right around the time they break ground. He set the contract down. He looked at Caldwell. He waited. Every head at the table turned toward the lead investor. The investor uncrossed his arms, slowly. Then he nodded. He is correct, the man said, in English, clear enough for the whole room. We raised this exact concern with your legal team last week, Mr. Caldwell. They told us it was nothing. They told us not to worry. Caldwell didn't answer. His jaw was working, but no sound came out. His hand lay flat on the table, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. And he had been buying and selling property on 3 continents for 35 years. He looked at the janitor for a long moment. And something in his face was different now. It was not surprise. It was recognition. Caldwell's voice finally came back, low and tight as wire. Anyone can memorize a few zoning codes. He looked around the table for support that wasn't there. That doesn't make him a lawyer. That doesn't mean he belongs in this room. Nobody agreed with him, not out loud, not with a nod. The silence said all of it. Here is the thing about Bryce Caldwell that almost nobody knew. He was not born rich. He grew up in a trailer park outside Joliet, the son of a mother who cleaned other people's houses, and a father who left before Bryce could walk. He wore the same 2 little pairs of jeans through all of high school. He got laughed at for the holes in his shoes, and he never forgot a single laugh. He built everything he had from nothing, no inheritance, no connections, no degree from anywhere that mattered. Just nerve and timing and an absolute refusal to ever be the poorest man in the room again. That, more than anything, was why Andre Coleman terrified him. Not because Andre spoke Japanese. Not because he'd found a flaw in the contract. Because Andre broke the one rule Bryce had built his entire life around, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. The rule that had pulled him up out of that trailer park. The rule was simple. There are people who serve, and there are people who get served, and the line between them is real, and it is permanent. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight is that you never ever have to cross back over it. A man in a gray uniform with a mop bucket had just stepped over that line like it was nothing. And if the line wasn't real, then everything Bryce had told himself for 30 years about why he deserved what he had, all of it came apart. Where the machines rattled the floor until he went looking for the one person in the building with the power to make the problem disappear. He found Frank Delaney still standing near the doorway. "Frank," Caldwell said, pulling him into the hall, voice low and sharp, "your janitor just humiliated me in front of $100 million client. I want him gone, tonight. And I want it understood that if he isn't, I take my business and my friend's business to the Drake across the street, where the machines rattled the floor. No does the same." Frank Delaney had managed hotels for 26 years. He looked at Caldwell, and then he looked through the glass at Andre, who was standing quietly by the window now, waiting to be told what to do, the way he'd waited for 7 years. "He translated a contract your own lawyers got wrong," Frank said. "I'm not sure he's the one who should be leaving. I spend 200 grand a year in this building." Frank nodded slowly. Then he said something Caldwell did not expect. "I've run this hotel for 9 years, Mr. Caldwell. I have never once fired a man to make a guest feel better about himself." He held Caldwell's eyes. "I'm not going to start with the best employee on my overnight staff." Caldwell stared at him. Then he turned and walked back into the room without a word. Back near the service elevator, a man named Curtis Bell, the overnight supervisor, had heard the whole thing through the cracked door. He'd worked beside Andre for 6 years. He pulled him aside by the elbow. "You good?" Curtis asked, voice low. "I saw it. I heard what Caldwell said he'd do. Man's got money. He can make your life hard around here. You sure this is the hill?" Andre was retying the knot on his apron, hands perfectly steady. "He bet me 50 grand I couldn't speak Japanese, Curtis," I said, and pulled the knot tight. "He didn't bet I wouldn't." Curtis looked at him for a long second. Then he shook his head, not in disagreement, but in something a lot closer to awe, and he let go of his arm. "Word moves fast in a hotel. The room service heard first, then the bartender, then the woman at the front desk. One by one, the overnight staff started drifting toward the 32nd floor, finding reasons to be in the hallway, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, peering through the glass of the conference suite, because something was happening up there that they did not want to miss. You could feel it building the way you feel a storm before the sky changes. The air gets heavy. People stop talking, where the machines rattled the floor until power. He had a phone full of people who could close doors with a single call, but up on the 32nd floor, in front of the only audience that mattered to him, he was losing something money could not buy back, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, and some part of Max turned the whole room over. Hideo Nakamura called Frank Delaney back into the suite. He spoke quietly, the way a man speaks when he is about to ask for something he considers important. "Mr. Delaney," he said, "I have an unusual request. Would you permit Mr. Coleman to assist us as an interpreter for the remainder of this meeting? Not as a member of your staff, as a consultant." He paused. "Your employee understood our contract better than the firm Mr. Caldwell is paying $800,000. I would prefer to continue with his help." Frank looked at Andre. Andre gave one small nod. "He's all yours," Frank said, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. And just like that, Andre Coleman walked back to the conference table, not as the man who'd been told to pick papers up off the floor. He walked back at the personal request of the guests of honor, where the machines rattled the floor midnight. The men Bryce Caldwell had, you could see the power shift in the seating. Andre now stood between Caldwell and Nakamura. And Caldwell, the man who'd been running the room all night, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, had to speak through the janitor to talk to his own about that. The man he'd tried to throw out was now the bridge between him and everything he wanted. The meeting went on, and over the next 30 minutes, Andre did not just translate words. He translated the space fed between them. When Caldwell made a joke about getting the deal done fast, the American way, Andre knew exactly how badly that would land. Because in a Japanese negotiation, rushing reads as disrespect, as a man who cares more about his timeline than his partners. So Andre softened it. He kept the energy and removed the blade, and Nakamura smiled instead of stiffening, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. When the younger Hoshino executive asked the environmental review on the lakefront parcel, he asked it formally, and in Japanese the level of formality tells you how serious the worry is. Andre carried that full weight across into English, and Caldwell, for once, gave a real answer instead of waving it off. When an associate raised a point about a rezoning ordinance that had no clean English equivalent, Andre broke it into 3 plain sentences. No filler, no guessing. He wasn't just keeping the conversation alive, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. He was the only reason the deal was still breathing was thick enough to choke on. The man Caldwell had called the help, the man he'd told to take his mop bucket and disappear, was the one man in the room standing between Bryce Caldwell and the worst night of his professional life. Roland Pierce, Caldwell's business partner of 15 years, had said almost nothing all evening. He leaned in close to Caldwell now and spoke under his breath. "He just saved your deal," Roland whispered. "Where the machines rattled the floor, right? Twice." Caldwell didn't answer. He lifted his glass and drank, long and slow, the way a man drinks when he's swallowing something other than whiskey. After the documents had been set aside and the room had loosened, Hideo Nakamura did something that stopped everything cold. He pushed his chair back and stood. He reached into his jacket and took out a business card. He did not hand it over casually. He held it in both hands, the traditional way, and extended it across the table toward Andre with a slight bow of his head. "Mr. Coleman," he said, "my company employs more than 200 bilingual advisors in Tokyo and 3 American offices. Not one of them read that contract the way you just did." He held Andre's gaze. "I would like to offer you a position on our cross-border advisory team, where the machines whenever you are ready." The room went still. Caldwell's face drained of color, the way a wall does when you cut the power. And Andre, for the first time all night, lost his composure. Just for a second, just enough to see. His eyes went bright. His lips parted, but nothing came out. He blinked twice, fast, and looked down at the card held out in both of Nakamura's hands. This was not the plan. There was no plan. He had not turned back around at that door, looking for a career. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. He'd turned around because a man had told him, in front of a room full of people, that he was nothing. That was the whole reason. That was all of it. And now a man who ran a company on 3 continents was standing in front of him, offering to hand him back the life he'd folded up and put away 7 years ago. He took the card, both hands, a small bow of his head, a gesture so natural that Nakamura's eyes warmed the moment he saw it. "Mr. Nakamura," Andre said, "I'm honored." His voice was steady, but his hands were not. "May I have some time to think about it?" Nakamura smiled. Not a business smile, a real one. "Take your time," he said, "but not too much." Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. His jaw moved back and forth, grinding on something he could not swallow. His janitor, the man he'd told to disappear, had just been offered a job at a table Caldwell was paying for, by the man Caldwell had spent half a year trying to win. But Bryce Caldwell was not done. He had one more move, and he made it the way he made every move, all at once and aimed at the soft spot. He stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He addressed the whole table. "All right," he said, "I'll give it to him. He speaks Japanese." He read the clause. "Credit where it's due." He paused, let the concessions sit there like bait. "But I made a bet, $50,000, and I'm a man of my word. So let's make it real." He pulled out his phone. "I'm going to get a certified court interpreter on a video call right now, a professional. If he passes a real test, legal, technical, the kind they use for federal certification, live in front of all of you, I write the check tonight, no argument." He looked at Andre, and the smile came back, thin and cold. "But if he fails even one section, he admits this was a parlor trick. He apologizes to my guests for the disruption, and he walks out of this hotel and doesn't come back." Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. This wasn't about $50,000 anymore. It was about Andre's job, his name, his place in the only building that had hired him when he was drowning. Caldwell was betting on the gap. Street fluencies rattled the certified fluency. He'd watched Andre speak, watched him read a clause, but a formal test administered by an expert, scored against a federal standard, that was a different arena. That was where the self-taught are supposed to fall apart. That was where the difference between immersion and a degree is supposed to finally show. He was counting on that gap. Nakamura looked at Andre. Frank Delaney, back in the doorway, looked at Andre. Curtis Bell, watching through the glass with half the overnight staff behind him, looked at Andre. The whole floor was holding its breath. Andre set down the notepad he'd been holding. "Make the call," he said. 2 words. No bluff in them at all. Caldwell dialed. The phone screen flickered and a face appeared, a woman in her 50s, glasses, a wall of legal books behind her. Dr. Eleanor Vaughn, court-certified Japanese interpreter. 20 years. She had interpreted for federal courts, for trade tribunals, for 2 different rounds of international arbitration. Caldwell explained the situation in 30 seconds. Dr. Vaughn raised an eyebrow, but she agreed. I'll give him 3 standard challenges, she said. Legal, technical, and idiomatic. These are the same materials we use for federal certification. She looked at Andre through the screen. Are you ready, Mr. Coleman? Yes, ma'am. Challenge 1. Legal. She read a paragraph from a cross-border joint venture agreement, dense and technical, full of terms that do not cross cleanly between languages. Fiduciary obligations, subordination of debt, liability caps. Andre listened. Then he translated, section by section, clean and precise. He did not stumble. He did not pause longer than a breath. He handled the terminology like a man who'd read contracts in 2 languages until the words went transparent. Dr. Vaughn's expression shifted, just slightly. The professional mask cracked half an inch. Accurate, she said. Excellent register. Caldwell did not move. Challenge 2. Technical. She read an engineering inspection summary from a Japanese construction firm, the kind of document where one misread character turns a load-bearing wall into a partition. Andre translated, steady, confident. Then he hit a term, a rare structural phrase that even native speakers sometimes trip on, and for a moment he paused. The room tightened. Caldwell leaned forward. This was it. This was the crack. Andre closed his eyes for 2 seconds. Then he broke the compound down, character by character, component by component, and rebuilt the meaning from the ground up, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, the way a man does when he learned language. For the structure of the thing itself, differential settlement at the foundation footing, he said, secondary to soil liquefaction risk. Dr. Vaughn stared at the screen for a long moment. That, she said, is a term half my colleagues would have to look up. Caldwell's leaning forward posture slowly sank back into his chair. Challenge 3. Idiomatic and literary. Dr. Vaughn's voice changed, softer now, almost careful. This last one is above professional level, she said. I want to be honest about that. This is academic. She read a passage from a piece of classical Japanese prose, centuries old, layered with metaphor and historical allusion, the kind of text graduate students sweat over. Take your time, she said. Andre listened to the whole passage with his eyes closed and his hands still at his sides. When she finished, the room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the city 32 floors down. He opened his eyes. Translated, not word for word, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, which would have been impossible. The weight, the image underneath the image. He found English that carried the same gravity as words written 1,000 years ago. He kept the poetry without losing the sense. When he finished, no one moved. Dr. Vaughn took off her glasses and set them on her desk. She spoke directly into the camera, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. In 20 years of certified work, she said, I have never tested someone with this level of command who does not hold a degree in the language. Mr. Coleman, wherever you learned this, you learned all of it. The room let out a breath it had been holding. Nakamura closed his eyes and nodded slowly. The younger executive was whispering fast to the man beside him. Roland Pierce rubbed his forehead like a man recalculating 15 years of assumptions, and Bryce Caldwell sat perfectly still. Then he reached into his jacket and took out a checkbook. He didn't do it gracefully. He didn't smile. He opened it, uncapped his pen, and wrote in silent, slow strokes, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, the handwriting of a man paying for something he never believed he could owe. He tore the check free and set it on the table, $50,000. It landed next to the corner of the contract, the same 40 pages he'd slid across the table to humiliate a man he'd called to help. Andre looked at the check. He did not pick it up. He looked at Caldwell instead, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet. I'm not going to take your money. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, he said. The room had shifted. That a man who cleans your conference rooms couldn't be worth anything to you, Andre said. You were going to lose $128 million on a clause your own lawyers signed off on. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. He slid the check back across the table, the same path Caldwell had sent the contract down an hour before. You're going to keep your money, and you're going to remember that the cheapest thing in this room tonight was you. Then something started in the corner. Roland Pierce stood up, Caldwell's own partner, the man who'd sat silent through the whole evening. He stood, and he began to clap, slow, deliberate. Each clap landing like a period at the end of a sentence. Nakamura stood next, then the 2 associates, then Frank Delaney from the doorway, then Curtis Bell, and behind him the room service runner and the bartender, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. and the woman from the front desk who had no reason to be on the 32nd floor except that she could not stay away, the hallway filled. Within 30 seconds, every person on that floor was on their feet, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. And it was not the loud kind of applaud, the kind that comes from the gut, from watching something you know you'll be telling people about for years. Andre stood in the middle of it in his gray uniform, with the coffee stain on the apron, and he did not know where to look. His eyes went to the floor first, then to Curtis, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, standing in the doorway with the whole overjoyed crew packed behind him like a family nobody had posed for. Curtis was clapping too, but he wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at Andre, and he was nodding, slow and steady, the nod of a man watching someone do the thing he'd always known they could. The deal did not close that night. Hideo Nakamura was a patient man, but he was not a forgetful one. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, he had watched Bryce Caldwell call a janitor the help, watched him try to fire the only person in the building who'd protected his investment, watched him bet $50,000 on a stranger's humiliation to save his own pride. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, and Nakamura had learned, over 35 years, that how a man treats the people he thinks can't hurt him tells you everything about how he'll treat you the day he thinks you can't either. 3 weeks later, the Hoshino Group formally withdrew from the Lakeshore Commons deal. Their letter was polite and gave no reason beyond a routine reassessment of risk. They did not need to give one. The word had already moved through the small, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, talkative world of people who move large amounts of money, and the word was that Bryce Caldwell's firm had nearly handed Tokyo a void contract and that Caldwell himself had spent the night, the truth came out, trying to fire the man who caught it. Where the machines rattled the floor that quarter, a pension fund that had been close to committing to a Caldwell tower on the river suddenly needed more time, and then needed it indefinitely. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, the $800,000 law firm quietly stopped returning his calls, the way people do when they'd rather not be associated with a story. Roland Pierce left the partnership that spring, where the machines rattled the floor for 15 years, and told himself the man's edges were the price of his success. The night on the 32nd floor cured him of that. He started his own firm, and the first call he made, before he'd even printed a business card, was to Andre Coleman. Bryce Caldwell did not lose everything. Men like him rarely do. But he lost the deal he'd built 2 years around, and he lost the partner he'd built a company with, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, and he lost the thing he'd spent 30 years climbing out of a trailer park to never lose again, which was the certainty that the line was real and that he would always be standing on the right side of it. Months later, Andre got a letter. No return address, but the postmark was a suburb where Caldwell kept a house. It was one paragraph, handwritten. I have thought about that night more than I have thought about anything in years. I told myself my whole life that I earned everything and owed no one, because the alternative meant remembering the people who looked past me when I had holes in my shoes. You reminded me that I became one of them. I am sorry, not because it cost me the deal. Because I am ashamed of who I was at that table. And I did not know I had become him until you made me watch. It was signed only with his initials. I. Coleman went back to Hartwell University that fall to finish the one semester he'd left undone 7 years before. Hoshino covered the tuition, not as a favor, Nakamura was careful to say, but as a recruitment cost, because they fully intended to hire him the day he passed the bar. He finished in a single term. He sat for the exam the following July, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, in a gymnasium full of people of still half his age. His father came to the graduation in a wheelchair, in a suit Andre had bought him, and when they called the name Andre Coleman, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, and could not quite manage it, so he just lifted both hands over his head and held them there, and a man behind him helped steady the chair while he did it. Andre took the job, but not the one in Tokyo, where the machines rattled the floor's new firm, working cross-border real estate deals. The kind where one wrong clause in one language can cost someone everything. He was good at it. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, he was good at it the way you're good at something you nearly lost the chance to ever do. And the first thing he did with his first real paycheck before he paid down the last of his father's debt, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, before he moved out of the apartment over the laundromat, he called it the Clarence Coleman Fund after his father, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. For people who'd been forced to drop out of school by a bill they didn't ask for, the medical kind, the kind that arrives in the mail and decides your whole life before you've had a chance to argue. The first year, it sent 4 people back to finish degrees they'd folded up and put away. One of them was a 40-year-old woman who'd left nursing school to care for a dying mother. Another was a man who cleaned offices downtown at night and had 3 years of an engineering degree behind him and no way back. Frank Delaney still runs the Carrington. There's a photograph behind the front desk now, small, easy to miss. It's Andre, where the machines rattled the floor until midnight, in his gray uniform, then by someone on the staff who thought to lift their phone at the right moment. Under it, on a little brass plate, 4 words, "Be somebody they need." Curtis Bell got promoted to night manager. On his first day, he taped a note inside the staff room, where the burnt coffee smell still lives. It said in his own handwriting, "Where the machines rattled pushing the cart, ask." So here's what I'll leave you with. Tomorrow somewhere a man in a uniform is going to hold a door for you. A woman is going to refill your water and tell you to have a good night. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. Someone is going to do the quiet work that keeps the floor clean and the lights on and the world turning, and you are going to look right past them. Where the machine, Bryce Caldwell, looked past Andre Coleman for the 7 years before the one night he couldn't. There is a whole life inside that person, a degree they had to leave, a language nobody knows they speak, a reason they're standing exactly where they're standing that has nothing to do with how far they could have gone. You will never know it, not unless you ask. So ask. Not where the restroom is. Not for the check. Ask them something real. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. You might be standing in front of the next Andre Coleman, and the only difference between a man and who finally gets seen is one person in the room who decided to actually look. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. Bryce Caldwell built $400 million on a single belief that the line between the people who serve and the people who get served is real and permanent, and that he would always be safe on his side of it. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. It took one man, a gray uniform, one night to show him the line was never real at all. And here's the part I can't stop thinking about. Andre Coleman spoke 2 languages and could read a contract better than a firm charging $800,000, and for 7 years nobody in that building knew. Not his supervisor, not the manager who liked him, nobody. The machines rattled the floor midnight. So, how many people have you walked past today who are carrying something you'll never know about? And what if the only thing standing between someone being invisible and being undeniable is one moment? Your moment, when you decide to stop looking past them and start listening. Where the machines rattled the floor until midnight. What's the talent you carry that nobody knows about? I read every single one. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And if you want to do more than feel something, look up the machines rattled the floor until midnight who had to walk away from a degree, a dream, a life, because a bill arrived and made the decision for them. There are funds, there are programs, there are people one open door away from finishing what they started. The world is not short on talent, it is short on people willing to see it.